Welcome, foolish mortals. No, wrong podcast. Oh. Well, welcome back, Moths to the Flame. We are so lucky today. We have with us a badass literary agent named Becky LeJuene. Thank you for joining us, Becky.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, Becky LeJuene is an agent at Bond Literary Agency, a Denver-based agency run by Sandra Bond. Prior to joining that agency, Becky spent time working as a bookseller, a freelance cookbook editor, and an acquisitions editor for a small regional press. She is a graduate of the Denver Publishing Institute and is actively building her client list. She's interested in cookbooks, which is cool. We'll have to talk about that. I think that's interesting. And YA. And then she's also interested in adult submissions in the following genres: horror, whoop whoop, mystery, suspense, thriller, historical fiction, more whoop whoop, sci-fi, fantasy, and general fiction. She enjoys plot-driven narratives with unique settings, strong world building, and well-developed characters. So, kind of a catch-all situation. I like that. So tell us, we've got a lot of listeners that are writers, and some that are unagented, some that are agented. We've got kind of a wide range of listeners. So just tell us about being a literary agent for the totally uninitiated. What is the purpose of that? Why is it beneficial to have one? What does a literary agent do?
So I'm basically your business partner. Sometimes I describe it as being your biggest fan, your biggest cheerleader, the person in your corner. I do everything from, I'm fairly editorial, so I do everything from working on drafts of the manuscript with my clients, then sending it out to editors that I know or editors that I think will be a good fit, negotiating contracts, selling sub rights, all of that stuff, making sure the publisher is doing everything that they're supposed to do in terms of marketing and all of that. And then, again, like a business partner, handling the business side of things. So the author doesn't have to. They get to focus on the creative side. If there are things like marketing says they're going to do this and they don't do it, and they're like, Becky, they're not doing what they said they're going to do. Oh my God. Then I can step in and like, hey, you said you were going to do this.
Hold up your end.
Yeah. If there are conflicts with the editor, for example, I can step in and say something as the agent so that the author can maintain a friendly relationship with the editor, and we can all move on.
You can be the bad guys.
Exactly.
Yes. And I imagine that is probably very uncomfortable for a lot of debut authors, newer authors, or even seasoned authors that are like, I don't want to damage the relationship. This person is, working on my writing, so I don't want to tell them, I don't know about that idea,
Yeah.
So, well, that's awesome. So how did you get into like being a literary agent? Obviously that, you don't just like go pick one out from the grocery store. Like, how does that happen? I know there's a lot that goes into it. So,
well, I started out as a bookseller in college. I majored in criminal justice with a double minor in English and anthropology. So
I love that.
You might surmise that I had different plans. But I continued working at the bookstore, beyond graduation. My husband and I moved to Colorado. I was still working at the bookstore. But I had started looking at, jobs in New York, and I interviewed for a few jobs, which fortunately I did not get. And then a friend of mine was like, well, you should go to the Publishing Institute. I said, what is that? So come to find out, I had very luckily moved to Colorado, where we have one of a handful of existing crash courses in publishing. I got in, I met Sandra there. I got a job out of DPI immediately as a managing editor doing cookbooks. Then I got a job as an acquisitions editor. And then I reconnected with Sandra, because at that point, everything I was doing as an acquisitions editor was basically what I would do as an agent, but it was on behalf of the publishing company.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like after building these relationships with these authors that I really wanted to be their advocates and not the publishing company's advocates. So,
Right. Right.
so I approached Sandra, started working for her as a reader and assistant, and eventually started taking on my own clients.
I love that. That's awesome. And I think there's something to be said too. You talked about how you started out as a bookseller and then you went into, became a reader and you're helping with client and you were an actor. Like there's a kind of a hierarchy, you got to go the steps of the ladder. You don't just one day wake up, roll out of bed and say, I'm a literary agent now. I'm going to, that's what we call a schmagent. Okay. Those are the people we do not want to be around, listeners. Okay. So I think that's great when people dip their toes in, get their feet wet, figure out what the business is about, and kind of grow into it. I think that's great. So we're going from cookbooks to, you represent a lot of horror.
I
do.
How
did we go from cookbooks to horror? Have you been a lifelong horror fan? Like, what drew you to the genre?
Yes. Lifelong horror fan, lifelong fiction fan, lifelong reader. I honestly never, one of the things, like one of the first days at the Publishing Institute, one of the things that they ask is, how many people here want to be an editor? And almost half the room, if not more, raises their hands. And I was sitting on mine. I did not have any aspirations to ever be an editor. It just so happened that that's what I ended up doing. I actually thought that I would be in marketing and publicity, because one of the more fun things that I did as a bookseller, and this was in the early 2000s, when I first got hired, our manager was like, oh, and these are our ARCs. And I said, well, what are those? And she was like, oh, they're free books the publisher sends us sometimes. And I said, well, can we get more? And she was like, I don't know. And so at that point, I started making all these connections and sending emails and telling people, like, oh, I've had really good luck hand selling this one. Like, keep me in mind if you have anything like that. So I really thought that was sort of the avenue that I would end up taking, not editorial, where I ended up for 7 years.
That's how it goes. I swear, that's exactly how it goes. In college, I had the same experience when a professor said, who in here is a special ed teacher? And I was like, not me. I'm going to be a 4th grade reading teacher. And then bam, shabam, 10 years later, here we are. That's just, I think we are put where we are meant to be. And then that's that. And now in writing world. So that's awesome. So
and it was 7 years in editorial, specifically in nonfiction, which again was never the goal. I always, way back there. So one of the jobs that I interviewed for that I did not get was as a sales rep for one of the big, at the time, 6. And when I did the interview and they asked, what do you really like to read? I was like, oh, this, that, and blah, blah, and horror. Cause I was like,
whispered it out of the side of your mouth. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh God, they're going to like look down on you for that. And, now it's booming. And, but yeah, no, lifelong horror fan. Always, fiction was always the goal. It was just not, the path meandered a little.
That's all right. And you know what? That's good, because you got your feet wet in other areas too. You're diversified. So
I did.
That's good. I like that. So tell us about a horror project that you have represented that you're particularly proud of.
Oh my God, my brain is pulling a blank, because the one that comes to mind is Alexander James's The Woodkin, which I believe is the first horror project that I have worked on that has come out.
Oh,
so wow. if I'm having a total moment here, and there's something I'm forgetting, I think everything else that I've worked on to date has been other genres, and that this is the first official horror novel. So it was really cool. If I'm remembering right, Alex came to me through a Twitter pitch event, actually.
Oh,
and
cool.
The opening pages of the book start with a hiker finding a dead body, which resonated for me because my husband had gone on a kayaking trip and they had found a dead body.
No.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah,
That is I feel like in water makes it even worse. Like,
Yes.
Yikes.
Yes.
Yikes.
Um,
Okay.
so yeah, to say I was like sucked into the story was
Yeah. You're like, oh, look, art mirroring life right now. Hello. Yeah. Okay, cool. So how do you feel like, I mean, obviously we like that kind of real world connection with horror, but then also I think a lot of us use it kind of as an escape, something that's completely totally unrealistic and out there. I love cosmic horror and that sort of thing. So why do you think that people enjoy that feeling of being scared and being like psychologically affected by horror?
I mean, it's safe for one thing. You get to experience it, and when you're done, you're done. When you close the book, when you turn off the TV, you're done. I To go back to the Woodkin, Alex laughs at me because I tell people like, "Oh, take this book camping," and he's like, "Excuse me, what?"
Oh my
But
God.
I happen to be a fan of sort of putting myself, or I imagine putting myself in like the perfect locale for like really experiencing the book. So I would take it camping. I don't like camping, but I would take it camping.
That
Um,
is messed up, and I love it. Like reading Jaws at the beach. Like that is my
exactly.
kind of vibe. I love that.
Exactly.
Well, and I'll tell you, and you've probably heard me talk about this on the pod before, but I love immersive, like, how actors will do method acting, and I like to do method writing. So if it's like a scary night scene, because I'm really scared of the dark, like legit out the things in the dark, and I mean I'm from the South, like it's scary down here, okay, out in the forest, all right. I like to
Hmm.
sit out there and just like absorb that fear and really immerse myself in it. So I totally get that feeling because I like to use it as inspiration. So I don't know what that says about us. That's more messed up, I
I,
guess.
I've decided I'm going to embrace it because
Yes.
everybody makes fun of me for it, and I'm just going to embrace it. I'm going to
Uh-huh.
start like when I recommend a book, I'm going to start at like adding a like you said, take Jaws to the beach.
I love that. No, and you know what that is? That's I got a phrase for you. It's embrace your inner intensity. Just embrace it. I love that. Live who we are. Authentic lives. Yes, that's awesome. So, what do you think are some of the most important elements of a horror story to really invoke that kind of feeling, that fear?
Um, Setting and character, obviously, but I think it's I imagine, because I'm not an author, I imagine that it's deeper than just writing a good setting, writing a good character. I think that the things that really resonate and the things that really work come from things that really scare the author, things that, that they're writing from a place of really being affected by something in particular. And I think that that comes through in the writing
Hmm.
and works for the reader. Um, and maybe not everybody, but the stories of if, where some of Stephen King's books come from and how they came from, things that he was actually afraid of. Like that is what I imagine makes the most effective, being able to put a little bit of yourself into the character and being able to imagine yourself in that setting and being able to bring that to life for the reader. Um, yeah.
I totally agree. I think that it does translate across the page when you can tell when an author has felt that before. We try like anxiety or describing mental health issues or something like that. Anytime I'm reading about something that I also identify with in a book, I'm like, oh, they know. If you know, you know, and they know. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, and it makes it a more enjoyable experience for me because then I'm like, oh yeah, been there, I feel it. So
And it's not,
definitely.
it's not literal, but it is
Right.
being able to take a fear that you have and put it into an imaginary situation or even a metaphorical situation so that that comes across. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can exercise that demon. You got that controlled environment. You're like, I can put this book down if I want to, and I can't, or when you're writing, you're getting it out and you're working through it. I just love that whole process. I think that's great. Religious trauma is something that crops up in my writing a lot. And I'm like that, exercising some trauma there. And it
Yep.
really is, it's nice and healthy. So I think that's great. Poor little. Now everybody's going to be looking at every word of my book, being like, "Oh dear, oh no." Not good. So, how do you personally decide which projects you're going to take on, especially since you not only represent horror, but you the YA and the cookbooks, which is awesome. Please tell me about that.
So I actually don't have any cookbooks. Well, I have one cookbook on my list. But that one, because I spent 2 years editing cookbooks and because I just love cookbooks in general. But it is sort of an odd one because I don't have any sales in that avenue. I have the experience. I know that I can do it. But yeah, so far I don't have any.
I have an idea for you. Remind me to tell you about it off of the pod.
All right.
A good old horror cookbook. I got one for you. So how do you choose like what projects that you're going to pick from in your inbox? Something rolls in, it's YA fantasy. What makes you say, I want that?
So YA fantasy is a tough one in particular because there's just so much of it on the market. In general, a project really has to pull me in. I have to like the writing. I have to like the voice. I sometimes describe it as like you start to get this like fizzy feeling like partway through the book and you're like, oh my God, this is really good. Oh my God. Is it gonna pan out? Can I keep it going?
Butterflies.
And at that point I kind of start to look at the author online and see like, oh my God, are they talking about other agents looking at their work? Are they talking about, and what kind of person are they just in general?
Right. Don't be a shithead online, people. That's what it means. Okay. Be nice. Exactly. No hate speech. Come on, people. Like, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there are a couple of other things that play into it. First and foremost, because I am editorial, it's important to me that I be able to identify any issues with the book, if there are any, and that I have a good idea how I might suggest we go about fixing it. And that doesn't have to be the end all be all, only one way about it that the author has to follow by any means. But my goal is that it's a conversation starter with the author. And there's always the option to say, well, I don't quite agree with that, but maybe we could do it this way instead. But there have been projects that have been really good that I know are really going to sell, but they have issues that I can't quite pin down, and I don't really have a good idea how we can address them. And that just says to me that I'm not a good fit. So all of those things have to come into play. I have to really love it. I know there's been some conversation about that, but a lot of things one of the things that I tell authors, and that I come back to a lot, is that you really want an agent who loves your work as much as you do. And that is because, you go through the query process looking for an agent, and then your agent basically does the same thing, putting it out on sub with editors. So not only do I read the manuscript multiple times, going through edits and trying to come up with, problem solving, any issues that are in the manuscript, I then send it out on sub and have to field, responses from editors, which is painful when it's not a positive response. And I don't like that part. No. But, if you imagine like your favorite book on your bookshelves, then imagine reading that, like, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times in quick succession.
Yeah.
And then trying to tell people like how excited you are about it and why they should buy it and why they, that's really what my job is. So, like, then imagine something you were forced to read in school that you really just did not like. Right. And you were like, this is fine. People are going to read this, but it's not my cup of tea. And tell yourself that you have to read that multiple times and try to champion it. It's kind of you have to love it. So,
well, and I think that goes, I think that maybe doesn't translate. I don't know how to say, like, there are a lot of writers that maybe don't understand that side of it quite yet, because they're like, why? It's a good book. What do you mean it's not for you? And it's like, that's actually a service to you, because you want somebody that will be the cheerleader for it, that will be like,
Exactly.
this is the best book ever, you want it. Like, they'll have ideas and excitement and fire for it. And so, it's better to have no agent at all than to have one that is not 100% all in with you. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind. Keep that in mind, writers. So then how do you balance like your personal tastes with what you think is going to sell? Specifically, like in a horror market where we have very niche subgenres that are for some people and not for some people.
I am completely driven by my taste. I have pretty wide tastes, to be totally honest. There are certain, again, with horror, there are certain things that I never really got into splatterpunk or, really hardcore horror.
Yeah.
But beyond that, almost anything is fair game for me. Satirical horror is another one that I'm not really so much into,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I read pretty widely, so my tastes are pretty wide. So yeah,
So you're able to kind of feel like,
I do have to consider whether something won't sell. But to be totally honest, I have fallen in love with some weird projects, and to my mind, whether it's a good thing or not, I believe that if I love it, somebody else is going to love it too, and we will find a home for it.
that's
So.
right. I mean, if one person can love it, then. So then can you tell us about a time that you had to reject a horror manuscript that you really liked?
I
And you don't have to be like, you don't have to say the specific manuscript, but
I'm trying to think. I don't think that I have had to reject horror manuscripts that I really like on a tight timeline. So when a querying author comes to me and says, I have another author, if you're interested, let me know. And that's standard in the industry. If you have an offer, it is generally understood that you're going to go out to everybody that has the manuscript or everybody that you've queried and say, I have an offer. I have to make a decision by X date. Let me know if you're interested or not. So I have had to pass on projects in that scenario because I do have a larger client roster now, and client projects are the priority. So I really can't drop everything most of the time to take a look at something, which has meant that I've had to pass on some things that I didn't get to buy as a reader when they come out at bookstores. So
that's
yeah.
right. That's exactly right. You still get to be a fan. So that works out. That's
Exactly.
good. So then how do you, I guess when you're looking at a query letter, and we'll talk about that just a little bit, because I think most of our listeners are past that point. But for those that are just in that in the trenches, bless them, what do you like to see in a query letter? And I mean, the formula that you have to follow and the stalking that you have to do to find all the information and make sure it's personalized. And what do you like to see in queries to you?
I mean, I'm less concerned with the like, oh, I see you represent so and so, and I really like their work, and my book is like that. I'm less concerned with that. I do want it to be clear that you have done your research, because if you come to me with a project that I don't represent, you're just gonna get an unnecessary rejection.
Yeah.
But in general, I want a brief description of the book. I want a little bit of biographical information. And then I want all of the major points. Title, audience. And by audience, I do not mean, women between the ages of 20 and 30 with one
Lord.
child. I mean, this is an
Demographics,
adult. Right.
Yeah. Love
I mean, like, this is my YA horror novel, or this is my adult fantasy novel, or this is my middle grade sci-fi novel, whatever.
that.
Word count. And then I want you to have thought about comps. But the thing with query letters is that I understand that it's difficult, and a lot of times authors will get tripped up over that query letter and sort of set aside their aspirations of querying because they feel like they can't get the letter just right. So I really, beyond sort of the general, tell me a little bit about yourself, tell me a little bit about your book, and the professional title, word count, genre, audience, I really want to dive into the sample. So I let the sample speak for itself.
I think that's great.
But when I say comps, I want you to give me an idea of what I'm getting into. So, if it's, I don't know, Stranger Things meets, oh my God, Cinderella. I don't even know.
Right. Oh, I love that. Somebody write that. That sounds hilarious. But even I think you've used a great example there, because Stranger Things is popular media, a popular TV show, but we immediately know the vibe from that. And
Exactly.
so I know a lot of us, and I'm so woo woo like that. I'm always like the vibes, but it is like you're explaining that immediately. When I say Tim Burton, you get the aesthetic, you know the vibes,
Yep.
like you know the genre, you're already there. And so by saying Stranger Things, same thing. And I think a lot of times people discount that. They're like, okay, I've got to find a comp. It's a book within 5 years. It's this, because, that's what they read online all the time. But I think if you can express the vibes, the aesthetic,
Yes.
in a really solid way, though, not saying like it's the Hunger Games, like don't say something that's so popular just because it's popular and you think that's going to make the agent want to read it, right? Like
Right.
It needs to be meaningful for your book, and there needs to be a reason you're comping it. So
Exactly.
I've done a lot of query critting, because that's another very important thing. Listeners, you should have a writer friend. You should have write squad, write groups, your people that you lean on, so that they can go through the trenches with you. And being able to see comps for like musicians or well-known people, or like it's Lindsay Sterling in a fantasy world or something like that. Like I love stuff like that, because it's still, you get the idea, you get the vibe. So
and some agents maybe have a different opinion about that, but
for sure,
to my mind, I want the comps. I mean, there are a few things. I don't want to come across comps that I've never heard of. I don't want to come across comps that are so old that, like, I do want to know that you have some idea of the market that you're writing for. But
right?
yeah, in general, I want to know, like you said, the vibes. When it comes to like, a book that's been out within the past 5 years and, considering sales and things like that, that's what I do whenever I put together a pitch letter for an editor. So I'm less concerned with the author doing that when it comes to me, and I'm more concerned with just sort of letting me know what I'm getting into.
I like that. So then talk about how you keep up with the trends in, let's say, horror, because obviously that's the shared genre that we talk about on this pod a lot. I know a lot of authors, especially ones that are starting out, they're like, where do I find all these things? Do I need to get the publisher's marketplace? I don't have access to Bookscanner. Like, what do I do? So where do you get your information, and where should authors be looking?
I read a lot. I read a lot. A lot of times I do have authors ask me, where do you see the trends going? What is on trend right now? If I want to write for the market, what do I write? And I tell them, don't.
Right.
Write the book that you want to write, because the process takes so freaking long.
Yes. The trend will be gone.
Yeah, if you're like, okay, folk horror is hot right now, I'm gonna write folk horror. By the time you get it out there, it could be like editors are like, we are so sick of folk horror right now.
Yeah.
We're looking at like whatever. So don't write for the trends, but do read widely, read the things that are coming out, read the things that people are talking about and recommending. Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time reading. Even when I'm not reading for work, I'm always reading for work, because it's all research. It all goes into my little mental filing cabinet of like, ooh, I really liked this. I wonder who bought this, which editor acquired this. And maybe that will be an appropriate editor for a project that I have. Maybe I haven't worked with this editor before, but I can say like, I know that you're going to like this because I love this book that you took on. And this is like,
same vibes. Love it.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. I think that's really good. That's good advice to give. Just make sure that you're reading widely, immersing yourself in the genre. Don't try to write something because it's selling hot right now, like romance. Everybody's like, "Oh, romance says a bit of that." I'm like, if you're not made for it, you're not made for it. Okay, like, calm down, Bessie. So, when you have clients that submit books to you in, let's say, a specific genre, and maybe they do want to make that jump over into romance or nonfiction or whatever, what kind of conversation, what does that look like when you're an agent? Do you just represent the one? Do you represent the all? Some agents only represent the one book, and then they go project to project. So talk to me
Yeah.
about that.
I do not do project to project. I represent authors. And in general, if they want to make the jump into something new, something different, I tend to make the jump with them. We do have a conversation about it, and I will say fully upfront, I've never done this before, but if you're, willing to work alongside me while I research this and figure this out, like, I'm happy to do this for you. There are situations though where you might actually just find another agent for that particular genre. And it kind of depends. One thing I'll say that I'm like not comfortable with at all. I don't read romance, so I don't know the romance market. So if somebody said they wanted to write a romance, if it was more of like a commercial contemporary romance, I would probably be fine with that. But if they wanted to do erotic romance, I know absolutely nothing about that market. I don't know who buys it. I don't know. That is kind of one of the places that I draw the line. I'm just like, we can talk about just about anything unless you want to write. And I do specifically tell that to authors. I'll tell them, if you want to do something else, we can talk about it. The only thing that I just cannot do is erotica. I don't even know what works for that kind of book.
I don't either. And that's one that I'm not and I love it for the people that are, because they're so passionate about it. But that also is like intimidating, because I feel like they are tight. Yes. And they Romance Landia and then the Exotica world, it's like impenetrable. Ha 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 ha, punny little moment here. So, what about when you do have to have difficult conversations with publishers? You talked about how you're the liaison kind of in between the author and the publisher, but then you have to, sometimes those difficult conversations happen, or sometimes you have to have difficult conversations with authors. So what does that kind of look like?
I mean, it's not fun.
Right.
It depends on the situation, and it depends on what the topic is, One thing that I don't think gets talked about enough, or people are afraid to talk about, is what happens when a book doesn't sell. And I tend to be very dogged and determined, and I don't like to shelve projects. So it takes a while for me to finally say to someone like, okay, I think it's time for us to set this aside and move on to something else. And that happens a lot in this industry. And I think it's important for authors, when they're looking at agents, to ask, so what happens if my book doesn't sell? Just because I think some authors are under the perception that means that the agent won't represent them anymore. And that might be the case if you're an agent that works project by project. But I mean, for me, it's no, we're moving on to the next thing. And I'm always sort of like in the back of my mind, like, okay, like, we had to set this aside, but I'm not giving up on it. Like, maybe one day we can bring this back out and like, yeah.
If there's a whisper of that trend maybe coming far, you're like, I already got this ready to go. It's been edited. We're good. Like,
conversations with publishers, again, it depends on the situation. If it's, I have been fortunate not to have worked with any of the houses that have had major issues that have blown up. But I would imagine by the time you get to the point of having that conversation, you're just so frustrated and pissed off and ready for it to be done that it's less like oh God, I'm so anxious about having this conversation, and more like, oh my God, we just need to like
End it.
get this over
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Exactly. Right. Right. So that, I think too, I know when I first got into the game, a while ago, I didn't realize that some people might end up having an agent, and then that might not be the best relationship for them. And then they have to, separate, kind of divorce, and then go
Yep,
separate ways. So talk about that too. I think that happens more than people realize.
it does. And it happens for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with anything personal. I mean,
Right.
you can discover while working together that you're not a good fit. Maybe where you want your career to go is not the direction that your agent seems to be helping you or wants to help you go in. Maybe the agent's tastes change. Maybe you start writing, like you said, in a different direction, and that's not something that your agent is willing to take a chance with or really knows anything about. Yeah, I mean, it's not inappropriate to say that the author agent relationship is a relationship. Then sometimes you
Right.
just grow apart.
And you get a divorce. I mean, that's why I said it like that, because I really feel like that's the way it is. So then how do you balance, because it is curating that relationship, when you have multiple clients that you're working with, because it is a partnership, how do you divide your time up? Because we know that you prioritize your clients, which is awesome. So how do you where do you put the focus? How do you manage that as a literary agent? I feel like that would stress me out, like trying to have all of the different irons in the fire. And I'll be like, okay, I know
It,
your book's going on sub and yours is over here. And like, that would stress me the hell out. So how do you deal with that?
I'm still kind of figuring that out, to be totally honest. Well, I mean, because it's, I am a very task oriented person. And so you kind of have to divide your day, but you have to be able to be fluid in how the day is divided, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, like
Maybe
flexibility. Yeah,
yeah, so maybe your routine is that you get up and you work on emails, and then you spend some time on queries, and then you spend the rest of the day on edits. I'm not sure, but
hmm
this week, for example, is like a big submission week. So I have been, and not a whole lot gets done in publishing in August, which is not
right,
entirely true. There's plenty that gets done. But from an agent perspective, most editors don't want to look at a new project in August. So I have been spending all of August just madly trying to work on edits and getting projects ready to go out the door.
right,
And because I am so task oriented, now I am having to go back and get my email back under control. Because besides taking a look at it for things that, needed to be dealt with immediately, I was so focused on doing edits.
right.
So yeah, it's routine, it's fluidity, it's what works for you. And yeah. I have a couple of different to-do lists. Like I have a broad to-do list, and then I have a narrow to-do list, and that seems to work a little bit better for me, because otherwise I sort of start running around like a chicken with their head cut off, and I'm like, I have so much I need to do and I don't know where to start.
I can't do any of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get that. I feel like that's some executive functioning skills though that I'm hearing, compartmentalizing the day and dividing it into sections. I applaud that. That's great. Absolutely. So then do you have to intentionally do that work-life balance thing? Because I noticed that you said you like to read outside of, work reading too. So obviously there's some
Yes.
sort of balance there. That's great.
Yes. And I have a 4-year-old. So
That's
I am,
right. Yes.
yeah. Like I said, I'm reading all the time. But I can't really read for edits after my son gets home, or on the weekends. It's just a different thing that I have to switch on. Especially like my first read through is usually more like a reader. If I were to go pick
Yeah.
something out of the bookstore, just reading it to read it. I am keeping an eye out for overall issues. I am making edits along the way, but for subsequent readings, I really like to do a more tightly focused reading in as short of a time period as I can, because I'm looking for inconsistencies and things like that. And so if I start a book an hour before my son gets home, and then I have to put it down and I can't pick it up again until tomorrow, and I mean, God, yesterday was a holiday,
Right.
I
Right.
kind of have to plan around that.
Right.
Because my preference is really to be able to sit down and have a chunk of time to sit and read a good portion of the book all at once. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the way I sort of balance that is that during the week, I like to read novellas and short stories so that I don't get sucked into like a
Yes.
commercial book that, that I'm not working on.
Right.
So I can
Right.
focus during the day on client projects. And then the evening is for novellas and short stories. And then over the weekends, I read novels. So,
Okay, that's a really
yeah.
good system. I like that because then you get that short spurt. So that's fun. I'm horrible. This is, well, I mean, it's not horrible, but I like to read novellas in the bathtub. Like,
Oh, yeah,
take
I
a
read
nice
everything in the bathtub.
yeah, like I just nice long soak, and I'm like, this is enough time for me to read a novella. Like I got
Yep.
this is good, So a lot. That's where most of my reading is. It's bath time. I'm a total purist when it comes to reading in the bathtub. So
Me too.
that's the only way. That's the way, though. It's nice and comfortable, and just as long. And I had never dropped a book in water my entire life until this is, and bless her heart, I told her this before she came on the pod, but I was reading Shadow Dancers of Brixton Hill, and the first book that I have ever drawn, and I don't know what happened. It's not like I was like shocked or anything. Like, it was a great story. I really enjoyed it, by Nicole Wilson. Everybody go buy it. But yeah, sure enough, not melted, but like drowned. And I had the podcast with her the next day. And so I was like, I'm going to have to hold up this sopping wet, pitiful ridiculousness. And thank goodness it dried and it managed to hold its shape. But if you ever would go back and watch the YouTube video, you'll see my little shambly copy that I'm holding up because it took a bath with me the evening before. So, all right, back on track, out of the bathtub. How do you see the horror genre? First of all, tell me how it's evolved since you got into really accepting horror manuscripts and that sort of thing versus now. And then I'd like to see where you see it going. Like, where do you think it's headed?
Well, I mean, it's definitely been booming. And while it is something that I was always interested in, something that I always wanted to work with, something I was looking to acquire, it actually took me a while to take on my first horror author. I just wasn't, the things that I was getting, I'm getting a lot more horror now.
You're
I
becoming
wasn't
known
getting as much.
people are knowing. Well, it's because you're visible at the horror cons now, and people are like, aha, she likes our books. So that's what it is.
Which is nice because in the beginning I did not get a whole lot of horror queries. And also I think some of the things that have come out since I started and have become popular since I started have helped open the floodgates, I guess.
Yes.
Yes. Now, as far as like where it's going, I hope that we stay in this boom. I mean, I admitted I've always been into horror. I read my first horror novel when I was 7 years old, 6 or 7, but it was age appropriate. But
okay,
I've always been, and I grew up at the time when you either read R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike or you read Lurleen McDaniel. And then, you grew up to read Stephen King and all that, or you grew up to read Nicholas Sparks.
That's right. That's exactly right. We cut our teeth on Goosebumps and then moved on. I know that is exactly it. So, I agree with you, and I think that horror is having such a boom, and I really think that like Netflix and all of these streaming services have something to do with it too, because it's made a lot of that horror media, those horror short films and, horror movies accessible, and people can
Yes.
just binge. And I think that and even like, what was that show that was so mainstream, but it was horror and it was so Squid Games. And I
Oh
was
yeah.
like, I couldn't believe how like mainstream, you know what I mean? And thinking about even Game of Thrones, because I'm big time fantasy person over here too, but like there's some
Yes.
violence in that. And I think we're all just becoming so desensitized, and like The Walking Dead and all of these horror, media content, whatever. It's so mainstream now, which I know a lot of us in horror like, meh, but but go over there. You're not OG, but like I like that it's becoming much more quote unquote acceptable, and you don't have to be like, horror. You
Yes.
can proudly be
Yes.
like, I write this, I read this, I'm into this. So
Well, I
yeah,
mean,
that's
so I started working at Walden Books in 2000. And there was horror,
mhm.
but what started to become more popular then were more mainstream authors dipping their toes into the horror genre. Things that people who didn't read horror could say, like, oh, I read this author, like, I'll try their new book, and then
Mhm.
realizing, like, wait, this is horror.
Yeah.
Um, and meanwhile, I was still there just like hand selling all the leisure horror, and my coworkers thought it was hilarious if anybody came in asking questions about Stephen King. They'd be like, you need to talk to her, and then they
That's
would
the
just
one.
stand there and laugh while I like talked this person's ear off for like an hour. So
That's fun.
yeah.
It's passion. I love that. That's fun. Okay, so how do you um foresee, I guess, with horror in the next few years, how do you see sort of AI impacting our writing world? I know I'm gonna put in a trigger warning for everyone here, but like, are we gonna see an influx? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
I hope not. I mean, my firm belief is that it won't be any good. It won't
Right.
have any heart. It won't have any soul. It won't resonate with readers. But ultimately, it's, coming from a bookseller background, it's going to be up to the publishers and Amazon and the bookstores. And yeah, I personally just think it's not going to be good. It's going to
Yeah.
be bad.
Well,
So
and
if they want to promote and market bad books,
that's on them. Well, and I think it's going to miss that key piece that we talked about earlier, that like visceral, real experience that
yes,
you can tell that you like someone, like a computer is not, they've never had that experience, even as much as they can gather from other works. And I'm not as worried about it either. I really think there's just something about, number one, that personal connection that people have between authors and readers. And I don't think that's going to die. I don't think that's going to go away, because that's half of the fun with
yeah,
buying books. It's like buying books from people that you know, or people that you follow, that you like, that you
yes,
enjoy, like you enjoy consuming their content. There's a whole personal side of that I think people are forgetting about. It's like,
yes,
this is, I will be more inclined to buy a book from somebody that I know immediately. I don't even care what the cover looks like. I'm like, oh, someone's Carver Pike read that. Okay, I'm gonna buy it. Like somebody, you know what I mean? Like I
yeah.
instantly am like, that book has to be mine. So it's just, I'm not as worried about it, I think, as a lot of people are. But we'll see how it shakes out. So maybe it'll just, all the laws will suffocate it, and I don't know. We'll see.
That would be
So
my hope. That would be my
yeah,
hope.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, I have thoughts. I won't go into them, but
Okay.
yeah.
So then what advice do you have for writers, horror writers, anyone who's trying to break into the business, maybe they're looking for representation, or they're writing their first novel, or feeling discouraged? What kind of advice do you have for those people?
This can be such a discouraging industry, and it honestly, it never changes. At any step of the process, you can get an agent, you can sell a book, you can have a bestseller. The next book is still questionable. So, you kind of have to grow thick skin, and you have to be in this industry for the right reasons. And that's basically, you write because you have to write. Mm-hmm. Don't get into this industry thinking that you're gonna like make $1 million on your first book and quit your day job. And I don't know. It just
gonna be famous.
I have realistic expectations, have realistic goals. And I think the most important thing, and you mentioned this earlier, is to connect with other writers so that you know that you are not the only person going through this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think for me, when I go through the hardest times, that is when I need my writer friends the most, because they are the only other ones that can understand it. And I'm lucky that my husband is a writer too. And so he and I can both kind of grovel in our misery together, but celebrate the highs and celebrate the lows. But there are other family members, they don't get it. They don't know like what that's like when you really hope for something, or, a deal falls through or something like that. That's a very unique situation. So having your tribe is bar none. So do you agents have do you guys have tribes too?
A little bit. It got a little tough there for a little while, especially during 2020. Mm-hmm. There is actually a decent group of agents in Colorado. And
y'all are like a little stronghold now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's actually really nice. It just kind of worked out. I mean, like I said, had I known when we were moving here, but
serendipitous.
I have made friends in the industry, which is nice because, again, we are oftentimes in the same boat as the authors. And there's not a lot of other people you can talk to about it. Like you said, like other agents understand. Mm-hmm. I personally, you don't really talk about it on social media that much because it's
can't.
No.
Especially nowadays. I feel like there's a lot of badness happening. We won't get into all that either, but man, it gets nasty. Yes.
Well, I mean, it's not even just that. It's just sort of like feeling like, just feeling down about the industry, or, having somebody who's going through the same thing who can say like, it's not just you. I follow some other agents that I've never met personally online. Mm-hmm. And it's always really nice. Like some of them do podcasts and some of them do online videos. Carly Waters is one of them. And she does really informative videos. And she did one the other day that was like, the industry is rough right now. It's not just you. And I was like, oh, it is so nice to hear another agent say that.
Yeah. No, that's good, because it almost like it's comforting to know whatever your situation is that you have there. You're not the only one. It sucks that everybody's going through bad, but like you're not the only one. So that's good. That is good. So then what is, you've given your advice for writers. I want to hear, what is the worst advice you've ever heard given to writers?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I hope that we're moving past it, but the awful advice where, first of all, if anybody reading your manuscript, God, I don't even know how to say this, like, there are realistic changes that you can request to manuscripts, and then there are, like, just absolutely bonkers. Like, I'm an agent, and this is one of the conversations I have with my clients. I am not the author. This is not my book. My goal is not to fundamentally change your book. My goal is to help polish it and get it ready to go out to editors. I think that we are moving past the point, I hope, where houses in particular are making recommendations to make a book more sellable by making it more commercial, i.e. more, cis het white.
Mm-hmm.
Those days were pretty awful, and
Mm-hmm.
hearing horror stories about that.
Yeah. Well, and completely
So
changing the fabric of the story and washing away all of the interesting part. Like, yeah, I totally agree. Hopefully we are moving. And I do feel like I've seen more in books that have been coming out in the last 2, 3, 4 years that that speaks to that I think has
yes,
become a little bit better. Not all the way there, but better.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's growth. We got a slow little growth, but we're getting there. So that's good. Okay. So last question before we get into the lightning round. What do your clients have coming out soon enough? What are they working on? What's going on with your clients?
My clients have a lot of things coming out. Some of them I came on board after the fact, so I wasn't really involved with, but
we still champion them. That's great.
Yes. I don't know why my phone is giving me a low battery, but Todd Kiesling has a new collection coming out from Cemetery Dance. Greg Gaffune has a new book coming out from Cemetery Dance. Alan Baxter has a new novella out from PS Publishing. Alexander James' debut, The Woodkin, just came out from Camcat. That one I did work on. Rachel Fader has 2 books coming out this fall. One is called Astrolit, which she co-wrote with McCormick Templeman, and that is sort of the intersection of astrology and writing. And then the other one is The Darcy Myth, which is a lot of fun because part of what she does there is analyzes Jane Austen through a Gothic lens.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming out.
Lots of exciting things for sure.
Yeah.
And Moths, pay attention because you may be seeing some of those clients on the pod in coming days. So can make sure that you're listening, tuning in every Monday. So awesome. Well, are you ready for our lightning round?
I hope so.
Okay. I mean, no pressure. It is what it is. It'll be okay. Okay. Would you rather be a ghost haunting a house or a demon possessing someone's body?
A ghost.
A ghost. No one has said demon ever when I asked that question. I think there's some sort of thing. They're like, oh, I don't know about that. So would you rather be stranded on a desert island with a group of undead zombies or a group of very alive cannibals?
Zombies.
Okay, so you feel like you could go up against the zombies and win, right?
I don't know, but
what if they're the fast zombies? They're the World War Z zombies. Take me out. I'm not even trying to be around for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go swim in the ocean as far as I can and just let me go,
Yeah.
Okay. Classic horror or modern horror?
Modern horror.
Modern horror. Interesting. Okay. What's your favorite? I'm just going to ask. We're already breaking the lightning round. What's your favorite modern horror movie that has come out in the last 5 years?
Was it the last 5 years? I loved The Ritual, based on the Adam Neville book. Absolutely adore that movie.
Yes, and I love anything that Adam Neville writes, by the way.
Me
If
too.
you all have not read his books, go read them all. They're so good. When you said folk horror, I was like, Adam, so good. So good. Okay. Do you prefer Bram Stoker or Mary Shelley?
Mary Shelley.
I thought that that's what you were going to answer. That gothic vibe. You like that. Okay. Do you prefer reading standalone novels or series with recurring characters?
Both, but I don't like it when my standalone authors start writing a series or when my series authors start writing standalone.
Stay in your niche. Stay there. Say what you need to do. Well, and
I'm not
that's
quite that bad, but I will get a little bit nostalgic for, either oh, can we go back to the series characters, or oh, can I have another standalone? You know, so.
Right, right. That's fun. That's fun. Okay, so would you rather, or actually, not would you rather really, but do you prefer the perspective of the hero or the villain? Which one is more interesting?
That's a good question. I don't know. So like we'll watch stuff with my son and he'll ask us like, is that person a good guy or a bad guy? And we'll say, well, they're a little bit of both.
Right.
So I kind of like characters that are a little bit of both, if that makes
Morally
sense.
gray.
Yeah.
Yes. We had that happen to us yesterday. I'm trying to give my child a Disney education and like an old time, 90s, 80s, 90s Disney education. And so we were watching Robin Hood, which actually came out in the 70s. And he was like, Mommy, but he's stealing. And you told me stealing isn't good. And I was like, okay, but he's stealing from the rich to give to the poor. And then I'm like, but it is stealing. I guess you're right. Like, it was very funny because I'm like, oh, well, maybe here we go with our Disney education. Like,
Well, and
so
it's so funny. Like, I know it's been sort of beaten to death at this point, but like, that's one of the things that I loved the most about The Walking Dead. Like, we're following these
yes.
characters and they are ostensibly the good guys, but just about every group you run into thinks that they are the good guys.
Yep.
So, it's really interesting to explore those perspectives, like
Yeah.
flipping the lens and saying, like, I mean, obviously, like the train yard cannibals were not the good guys, but
Right, obvious. And Negan was not a good yeah. But like I think too that almost you like historical fiction and history is kind of that way too because you're
yes.
taught this history, this is how it happened, this is who the good guys were, and then you dive further. That's why I love history so much and why I love writing historical fiction so much, because you dive in and you're like, oh shit, we weren't the good guys in that situation. Like,
Yes.
in most situations, oh no, like that person is not a good person. So that's a really interesting juxtaposition from like what you've been trained to know
Yes.
versus what then you learn. And you're like, when you find out Columbus was an asshole, you're like, whoa, I thought he just like sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Like, I didn't know that he was an actual asshole. Like, so just call this the anti-Columbus podcast. It's fine. Okay, back to the lightning round. Psychological depth in movies or books, or fast-paced plot?
Psychological depth.
Okay, very interesting. Human fears or otherworldly terrors?
Otherworldly terrors.
Okay, so cosmic horror. Yeah, okay. Haunted house, haunted forest.
Ooh, both.
Right. Like go through the forest to get to the haunted house where I get to stay the night. Yes. Okay, so spending the night actually leads me into my next question. Spending the night in a hotel with Annabelle the doll or Chucky?
Annabelle.
I feel like she could probably she just moves a little bit and then you can move
Yeah.
on. So yeah. Okay. Dark and twisted endings or unexpected plot twists?
Both.
Okay. I like it. I like when they're dark and twisted and unexpected. Like,
Yeah.
what's that one movie I love? Cabin in the Woods. The ending to that movie, I was like, absolutely, yes. I'm just like, that is the kind of ending I love to see, where it's just totally outside of what we expected. So yeah, awesome. Okay, let's see. Creepy dolls or eerie abandoned places?
Abandoned places.
Definitely. Do you ever visit any abandoned places?
I don't know that I've had the opportunity.
Oh, you must. That's so fun. I don't, and maybe it's just again the deep south, and we have haunted hospitals and old prisons and shit down here. We got all kinds of weird, like railroads, train cars. I live for shit like that. I love it, and still have not seen a ghost. So bunch of bullshit. Anyway, all right. Psychological horror or supernatural horror?
Supernatural.
Oh, okay. Okay. Let's see. Real life fears or totally off the wall fantastical fears?
Off the wall fantastical fears.
I like off the wall fantastical fears too. Yes, and I even have one because I'm deathly afraid of chickens. But like, I like deathly afraid of chickens. Like, I think they're going to eat me, and I blame it on a book series where they had these demonic chickens that like ate everybody, and
Oh
so
my gosh.
yeah, and it was in a fantasy book. I like wasn't prepared for that. Okay,
Oh,
so just everybody be warned if you read the Sword of Truth series. Okay, it has some demonic ass chickens in it. But then others, like I can sit and watch, Saw and Stranger, all the things, and none of it bothers me. But chickens, yeah, not for it. Okay, podcasts or audiobooks?
audiobooks.
Audiobooks. Okay, audiobooks or handheld books?
Handheld books.
Handheld books. That's a good one. Gotta have the smell. Gotta have the typical experience. Absolutely. Okay, well, that's the end of our lightning round. Thank you so much for coming on the pod. I've so enjoyed talking with you today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, definitely. We'll have to have you back on. You'll have to talk about more of your deals as they
Oh my
come out.
gosh.
And
Happily.
definitely, yes,
Yes.
yes. We pump all of the books out in the world. We love it. Love to see it. So thank you again. I super appreciate you coming on here. And everyone else, Moss to the Flame, let's fly to the flame. Bye-bye.